it's better. I'll rather fix. So it started recording.
Okay.
Let's see.
You said Lillian and Elijah are now on.
Yes. Hey
Hi.
Lillian.
Hey, Lillian and Elijah.
Okay.
We're just waiting for Bright. Hopefully he'll log on soon. I tried to contact him earlier today and I haven't heard from him. So I'm hoping he's in an area where he actually has Wi-Fi.
Cool. Yeah. And I have a special affinity for Ghana. I don't know why. I don't know
Is that,
enough about the place, so maybe it's all just romantic. But yeah.
have you been there?
Oh yeah, just for a week, eh? When I was doing consulting.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I just wish I could have experienced. Well, the one thing that I found strange, just
Oh,
to
you
show
said that to Ghana. I remember that actually. Uh-huh.
how colonized I am, was I got there and it was a Friday. I remember on the Friday. I remember all the employees were wearing um, sort of African style clothing, right? Which,
Yes.
I mean, in South Africa, we wear, the Western style from Monday to Friday, right? Even though on Friday we might be a bit more casual in general in
Yes.
corporate spaces, right?
Yes.
Whereas here in South Africa, by the time we wear more African style, we call it quote unquote traditional, right? And
Yes.
it's going to be at a special event like a wedding or a family gathering, in terms of formal gear. So I was
Yes.
so confused when I got there and they were wearing, and it was just, yeah, the streets were bright and everyone in the office was looking. I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then they even had company logos printed on the clothing. So the company, I'm used to a company having a logo, but on a normal sort of like or at least in South Africa, what we perceive as sort of the usual in corporate spaces, right? Where you've got like a company shirt, but not
I like
not
saying,
on African print.
yeah. Right.
So and then I asked them, I was like, wow, guys, and they looked so amazing. I was so jealous. And then so I asked, was like, how is it? Yeah, I was like, I'm from South Africa, so there's a lot that I don't understand. Please just help me understand. So how is it that everyone here is wearing, and obviously it was my first time in West Africa as well. How is it that everyone is wearing, uh, I guess, this style of clothing? And they're like, oh no, the government apparently it was a government intervention that every Friday they wear African styled clothing, and that's why even the companies print out their logos on the clothing and give it out. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I mean, obviously, this was one data point because I was at one specific client.
right.
So I don't know what how other companies, but yeah, and then also, yeah. So people were quite proud even to wear the company logo, the clothing with the company logo on it. And
Interesting.
yeah, and the clothing, it's so great. That I was just like, wow. I think a lot of people in South Africa would appreciate being able to do so. Sort of the same
Right.
way,
Right. Right.
yeah, with Indian folks. I mean, it's quite normal for Indian folks to come wearing Indian style, and it's in a formal corporate setting without people calling it quote unquote traditional. I've had a lot of Indian managers who would come in a sari. Um,
In South Africa or in Ghana?
oh, in South Africa.
Really? I've never seen that.
Yeah. So I've had quite a few Indian managers coming in a sorry, and yeah, so it wasn't no one said anything. So yeah,
Interesting. Very interesting. Hmm. Let me, Kotze, just hold on. I want to just put my plug here because my laptop is going to die, and for some reason, it's not.
sure.
The fuse has blown.
Oh, goodness. Is your charger okay? Did it not burn up?
No, no. So let me just please a second. I'm just gonna get another thing. I'll be back.
Sure.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sure. Hey, Rachel, I was just wondering,
Yeah.
as soon as we have, because Lillian is still on and Elijah is off, as soon as we have two people, do you think it's worth, sorry?
You think we should start?
Oh, yeah, maybe. And then maybe just discuss, because I was always curious about what people perceive to be some of the biggest problems in society.
Sure.
Who knows, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we can just start. Is it just Lillian who's on now?
Yes, it's just Lillian.
Hi, Lillian. You're the only trooper today.
Hey, hi Rachel.
Hi. We have consistently lost the crowds on this webinar, which is quite sad. Khotso was actually telling me that statistically, most online courses whittle down to 5% attendance towards the end. So we're clearly on trend, which is sad, but clearly is what. How are you doing?
I'm all right. This is actually most likely my last webinar. Not because I'm trying to follow the trend, but because I'm relocating and I'm not going to have Wi-Fi for the next, good Wi-Fi for the next like 6 months or so.
Wow, where are you going?
I'm going to be sort of camping between Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and Gauteng. And then I'm going to go to Germany and do a little bit of backpacking there while also doing my research. And then I'll be back in January.
That is fantastic. That's amazing. Enjoy that. And all of this is voluntary, right? It's you taking time out? It sounds like.
Yes. So I tend to squeeze in time to relax into my research opportunities. They, if they are spread around the world and I have those, time between, I don't know, a job and a job or submission of a research proposal and starting the sampling or that kind of thing, I try to throw in something fun to do.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, and Lillian.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Is it Khotso?
Yes, this is Khotso. Hey, I was just wondering, so as you're doing all of these different activities, do you have like a business partner running your swimming academy?
So actually, I've had to close down the Polokwane side of the academy. I got to this decision, when did I go home? June, yeah, last month. Yeah, the people that I'd left in charge didn't seem to be doing a good job. Part of it is my own weakness. One of the weaknesses I have in my leadership style is I just don't do good succession planning. I'm battling with this for the last couple of years. I'm hoping that one day I'll get it right. And I mean, when I was running it, we had about between 30 and 60 kids every school term. And when they ran it, they had 5. And that just did not make any economical sense. The income from that couldn't cover the cost, couldn't even pay the people themselves. So I'm thinking of just turning myself into, you know, a mobile swimming instructor. So I come to you wherever you are and do the lesson. So that's something I'm gonna be trying from like January. It is a bit risky because, you know, now you're in people's environments and you may not have the tools that you need, and you know you're at risk essentially. But I'm busy thinking of ways of, you know, making it work without necessarily compromising my safety.
You know, I have a special wish, more like a fantasy. So I've always wanted to learn how to swim. I think there are a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, I guess it depends, but the potential might be a market of adults who still want to learn how to swim, especially in groups, kind of like how, yeah. So, yeah, if you could come to urban spaces in Joburg as well and try I don't know if people would like that, but I think I would. And even if it's, yeah, even if it's, because I know, even if it's like at the poolside in Maboneng, and I don't know if that's the right kind of space where it's got great vibe, great music. Even though it's not a proper structured swimming pool. I don't know. But maybe people. Wait,
no, that's interesting. Thank you. I'll think about that. I definitely do have a lot of adults that are interested. The problem with adults is that because they're not competitive about it, they don't mind if they do 2 weeks lessons and leave the other 2, even if it's paid for. They don't really think of getting, you know, value for their money. They're like, well, I got better things to do, kind of thing. But with kids, they tend to be slightly competitive about it, and that keeps them at, you know, at the edge of wanting to continue to learn. And the other interesting thing that I found with adults, because adults tend to want positive affirmation all the time, if they're swimming and they're just not progressing quickly enough, they get demotivated. So I find myself having to do extra affirmations for my adult learners just so, you know, they can keep coming, because and I don't know, and they also think swimming, they think learning to swim is easy. You know, they get there and as soon as they get there, so how long will it take before I can swim 25 meters on my own? And the reality is it can take 3 months or more. That's if you even come consistently, right? So when they're there and after 2 weeks, they're still using flotation devices, and you still go with them to the deep end. They start feeling as if they're not learning anything and they give up. So yeah, I want to find a way of, making, I don't know, maybe I should create some app or something. You know, the way they track your running? You're running with this heart rate, you're covering this mileage, and you can share it with your friends, and, it makes running to be cool, sort of. So, I don't know, maybe I can think of something to make swimming lessons to be fun and, to show your progression, because it's really, it takes time before, like, there's the gap between I can't swim and I can swim. It's a big one. So yeah, but definitely if you have ideas like this of incorporating to the urban spaces and stuff, yeah, I'd love to chat about them. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Well, we've got 3 more people now. Hotso, can you see that?
Yes, hey Bandile.
Hi, how's it going? I'm sorry for being late.
Okay, Bandile, welcome. And is Elijah back? Is that the other person, Hotso? Who's that? Who's the other person that's on?
Yes, Elijah is back.
Okay. Okay, so I think let's begin, and let's maybe just spend a short time having a conversation about this week's module. So unfortunately, it looks like Bright is not going to make it. I tried to contact him earlier today just to say, hey, remind him that we're going to have the call today, but I've actually noticed he hasn't been active on the Tutu Fellows group, and that's where he usually is very active, so that's how you know he's connected. But it looks like he's not connected today, and my sense is that he either is in a place where he doesn't have Wi-Fi, or I'm crossing fingers that he's okay, or maybe he's just forgotten. It just looks like, messages are not getting through to him, they're just ticking once, etc., etc. So I suppose we are on our own for today, unless he does decide to show up. But this week, what we were discussing is solutions for society, and really looking differently to when we spend time with Swati about societies for the, solutions for the individual. Looking at what it means to create solutions when you're thinking more broadly, to create a better society, a different society, etc. And I guess a good place to start would be to hear from you guys. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the material. This week we had 3 key things. We had the video by Naomi Klein where she was speaking about really having a responsibility around environmentalism and these assumptions we make about the earth and what it can take in terms of business, so being conscientious within that space. We also had Fred Swanik talking about developing leaders for Africa and the work that he's doing through the Africa Leadership Group, so the number of things that they do in the Africa leadership space, universities, the college, etc., the academy, sorry. And then finally, we had the very long Quartz business video, which was really good. There was 2 hours of sort of different entrepreneurs talking about the work that they're doing and just being able to see that the impact that they've had. So I don't know if everybody has had a chance to actually watch and look at the videos. I would love to just start by hearing your perspectives. Like, what were the 2 things that stood out for you about this content?
Sure, maybe I could just quickly chip in there. This is Hota. So for me, the Quartz video is really great, just getting to see what different types of opportunities and issues people are tackling from various parts of the continent. Because I tend to be very focused on South Africa, so it's very nice just to get a broader view. In fact, for those of you, if you haven't seen the Alan Gray Orbis Association newsletter that came out last week, I've included a segment, but in text form, where they profile entrepreneurs from different parts of Africa, also done by Quartz. It's very nice, beautiful. Please have a look at it. So that, and then I think the second thing was then in designing solutions for society, thinking about how to manage negative externalities on different communities. I think that links back to responsible entrepreneurship. So making sure, does your business model harm other people? And then how do you sort of rework that? So Naomi Klein did a great segment on that. But although from her perspective, she was just talking about big companies that took capitalism too far and then just damaged people without thinking about their actions.
Right, thank you, Khotso. Anybody else? Any takeaways? I hope you guys actually did look at the content. Oh, it looks like we didn't. Are there any thoughts on the topic, solutions for society? I mean, what compelled you to want to be on this, to be a part of this module today? Maybe let's do that as a conversation starter.
A quick thought on my side, Rachel, was when I was thinking about solutions for society, and maybe a question that I could also put forward to all of you is, what sort of problem exists in society that you didn't think was a big problem before? So an example is, I've heard some female friends say that patriarchy and sexism is probably one of the biggest problems in the world, if not the biggest. And although I don't really understand everything in this space, naturally because I haven't lived the experience, I did find it interesting to at least ponder and think about all the other externalities that come with, I guess, patriarchal behavior. So not just the impact on women, but things like, aggression that leads to things like war, large-scale wars. And not to say that women wouldn't want to also get into large scale wars if it came to that. But those types of things that I didn't think of, violence, etc. So it's a thing I don't understand fully, but it did help me think about what other problems I might not be perceiving that affect us today.
Well, in fact, Naomi Klein in her video has that moment where she actually says part of the reason, when she talks about the reasons why we've been sort of abusing the earth. And at some point, she puts up a slide of, one of those figures of men, and she says men is one of the reasons why. And I thought it's an interesting, we should discuss that, because I have a different perspective, but that's a very interesting one that you brought up as well. And that's a good question, by the way, Khotsa. I really like that question. So guys, any thoughts? A problem in society that you didn't know existed before, but now you come into consciousness that actually this is an issue and perhaps there's a solution that could be created around it? Or just what are your thoughts? What brought you, what compelled you to want to be a part of this conversation?
Feel free to just unmute. Go ahead, Elijah.
So for me personally, a lot of my business ideas are around venturing into helping society. So me coming onto this is just for me to hear what other people have, other ideas, and how we can maybe possibly collaborate, just to be more informed about how going about solving a society solution can be turned into a business. Because I think as Africa, we always tend to look at our solutions, our problems, trying to solve problems as just a case study, and not turning that into a business. And that's what falters the sustainability of our solutions. And going to the question about what I thought was never a problem and only seeing it now as a problem or a solution, the problem to society was the whole issue of pads in terms of for females, for periods. I watched a video a while back of how it's very difficult for especially homeless females to actually acquire pads, and how the exorbitant prices makes it difficult for them. They get to a point where they have to choose food or buying a pad because of the expensive cost of pads. So that's one thing that's been on my mind recently, trying to reduce those costs as time goes on, trying to maybe remanufacture it or something like that. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I've been, in addition to what you're saying, Bandile, been surprised by the alternatives that people use for pads, which are quite dehumanizing, and that has also surprised me, like stones and sticks, and yeah, very interesting alternatives. Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you, Elijah. Also, it's actually Bandile next.
Oh, was it Elijah?
Yes, Elijah just gave us his view.
Oh, sorry, I thought that was Bandile. My apologies.
Sure. Elijah, if you don't mind self-muting.
No worries.
Sorry.
And Bandile, you can go ahead.
Hi. So yeah, what's gotten me interested in this conversation is looking at or trying to find case studies of ways in which social problems can be solved through business. One big thing I've had on my mind in only recent weeks, and I think it was mostly inspired by James Mwangi's discussion with him, was finding a mass-based solution to getting connectivity, internet connectivity, especially to low-income areas or the marginalized areas. I think it's something that's just popped into my head now. There's a range of other things that I rather than put like this, I've got a full sort of grapple of the broad landscape of social problems that South Africa faces, but it's just wanting to to get more thinking and get more experience on how you can actually solve these issues through business. So that idea, I've really enjoyed some of the learning more about what our own fellows are doing around education. So Doug Hernley, with the rethink education and using, you know, WhatsApp like technology to facilitate communication between parents and school teachers, this sort of thing. And yeah, that's sort of what I'm interested to know more about, and why I think at the very beginning I was interested in this course and in this module in particular.
Mm.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mandile. Okay. Lillian, does Lillian have any thoughts?
Thank you. For me, the two recent social, issues that have come up, in the last 2 weeks. The one is road rage. Someone related to someone I know shot someone in Durban because of road rage. And, having been on South African roads myself, I do think road rage is a problem. And I've just been trying to think of solutions for that. I think Discovery Insure has come up with some really interesting ways of tracking people's driving styles and rewarding people for good driving using some really smart data analytics. And I was just wondering, what chances there for doing something like that, or thinking about road rage in a different way. And then the other one was I don't know. Pardon?
The person who was shot, did they survive?
No. So someone is currently serving a sentence.
And this is your
because
friend of your friend, the
yes,
relative
my
of
friend's relative. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, other people have been injured and scratched each other's cars through road rage. It does happen. And then the other one is with marriage and divorce. So Stats SA released a report for 2015 records of marriages and divorces. And they found that almost half of the divorces that happened in 2015 were for marriages that had not reached their 10th anniversary. And I thought that was really interesting. If half of us are not going to be married after 10 years, then, why are we even doing it? And I've been talking with multiple friends about it, to try and get their perspective. I sort of expanded the discussion because I was really curious to say, actually, guys, why is this happening? People have now proposed interesting ways of dealing with the problem. I'm sure, I'm no relationship expert or marriage counselor or whatever, but from the discussions we've been having, some of the things people said were people, once they get married, they start to relax. They have this, oh, I have you now, so I don't have to keep winning your heart. I can just relax. Even if I cheat on you, you're sort of forced to stay with me, that kind of thing. And others sort of just take it through because they're like, oh, I don't want to be a failure and divorce you, but anyway, eventually some of them do it. So my one friend proposed that how about we turn this marriage thing into a free market system where you are only with a person for as long as you are working hard to be with them. So we throw away the legal requirements and the written agreements. So if you're with someone and they're making you happy, you're with them. And then the minute they slack, you go to the next one, like that. And the idea is if people know that they can lose their partner so quickly, then perhaps they won't find it so easy to slack. They will keep trying hard to make sure that they're giving the very best they can to their partner in order to keep them. And, this person was basically using, communism versus capitalism sort of, when there's competition, human beings tend to fare better than if they're just guaranteed social benefits, even if they don't do well. So yeah, it's just been an interesting conversation that I've been having around my social circles lately.
That is fascinating. What a fascinating problem to be thinking about. In fact, it brings to mind something I was reading a couple of months ago, that in fact, in existence already in some societies are what, I can't remember the name for them, but they're called, I think, basically short-term marriages. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's almost like a lease to buy scenario where you are required first to semi-marry the person for about 3 to 5 years so that you can figure out if you actually want to be together. And if you've now managed to work through those 5 years, the assumption is that, okay, you can coexist and do so in harmony. And then that's the only time the courts will then allow you to like permanently marry. It didn't say anything about the success rate of those kinds of marriages. Or maybe it did and I missed it, but I thought it was fascinating that there's all these alternatives that I suppose we don't explore. And I guess the question would be why.
Maybe,
yeah, I think that is very interesting.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Kotso, you were saying something.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Lillian. You were saying?
Oh, I was saying, so we... Okay, I will go.
I was not trying to go. I was trying to say I'm done. So go.
Okay, cool. So we're saying, we also think that it is actually absurd that, you spend 3 years with someone and say, okay, I think it's safe to spend the next 50 years with them. 3 versus 50, the stats just don't make sense because human beings change all the time. Like, I mean, on Friday night, I was writing something. I woke up and on Friday night when I wrote it, I thought, this is amazing. I woke up on Saturday, maybe it's because of, the beverages we had, but anyway. So I wake up on Saturday and I think, this is so crappy. Already I had changed my mind. Something I thought was really amazing, I wake up and I think, actually, this is poor quality, I have changed. I'm no longer that person I was the previous evening. So, and human beings change all the time. So if we change so much, what makes us think that who we are in 3 years is who we are likely to be in 50 years? So, that 5-term short marriage versus long marriage thing, that's what sparked this, to say, obviously they will behave in that 5 years because they're looking at the longer term of 40 years or however long they want to be with the person. But yeah, I just think it's very interesting, and it is a conversation that not many of us are willing to have because of our cultural, religious, and social beliefs and things that we sort of have agreed to be doing. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey Lillian, on that point, there's a fantastic podcast I was listening to, funny enough, just yesterday, from Freakonomics on marriage. So they had these different economists discussing their perspective and just debunking some of the myths and speaking about potential innovative solutions. And both you and Rachel mentioned different types of contracts. So I'm actually going to send you the link. I'll put it in the group chat now. But obviously, the main issue with this podcast is it's mainly American statistics, American UK, so it's not that useful for us. But it's still interesting nonetheless. And then maybe just to add to that, the one that I always think about besides marriage is, I think people struggle to find dating partners, especially once they move to cities like Joburg. And dating apps are just a bad way to because just the way the noise versus signals that dating apps have, a lot of what you fill in your profile is more noise than it is a useful signal. And I always say that the way dating apps are structured don't really mirror how people meet in reality, because people meet through social networks that they have and through affinities that they share, like same church, or certain schools, yeah, neighborhoods, etc. As opposed to I like Tabiso because he enjoys tennis. But anyway, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting insight. So, I mean, to add, I don't know if there's someone hands who's still up, but I want to take the conversation further to the next stage because we've all had an opportunity to put down what societal issues we feel have an opportunity to be solved. And if I were to put mine into the mix, and I think it can also then act as a segue into the next part of the conversation, is I think the biggest problem that has become apparent to me that wasn't apparent before is that actually a big problem amongst us as people is courage. So, you know, because I'm a leadership practitioner, so I'm always looking at the soft side of stuff. So what is the psychology that may be holding us back? And for me, over time, I've boiled it down to a lack of a critical mass of courage for people to do things that wouldn't normally be done. And I don't mean courage in the radical toy sense necessarily to the picture that we have this week on the EI platform, but really more, are you willing to do the inconvenient things so that you can create the solution that you need? Are you willing to let go of certain comforts, etc., so you can do the stuff you need to do? So interestingly, Boniface Mwangi, who was one of the guys who speaks on Quartz, on the Quartz video that we had this week. So you may have heard of him, he's a very radical Kenyan activist and has been speaking against the government for a very long time and is now actually running for a parliamentary position. But he has an interesting video. It's not a part of the Quartz, but they discuss it in the panel. But basically, he created this video of his death. So it's this very steely video of him lying on the, you know, the hospital steel thing where they put dead bodies. And, you know, the doctor has undressed him and basically they switch off the lights, he's going to get buried. But he basically starts to reflect. It's a 2-minute video and he's basically saying, you know, we go through our lives trying to avoid the hard things because essentially we're trying to do the easy things, what he calls the American dream. So we're all trying to achieve the American dream, get a wife, get a dog, get children. And he says, and then we're stuck in these corporate jobs that we hate. And we don't really ever solve for anything that really matters to us. So we've got the voice inside our heads, but we don't pay attention to it and we don't have a sense of urgency to do the stuff. And in his particular space, because he's an activist, he says a lot of the time the government is threatening you with death. You get death threats a lot, we will kill you. And so this video was meant to be, it's called One Day I Will Die. And his provocation was, so what? So what if you kill me? I'm gonna have to die some way, somehow anyway. So kill me if you have to. But I'm going to have to do what I have conviction to do. And at the end of the video, he says, you know, it is only courage that will allow us to change the world as we know it. And for me, it was such an interesting omen, because for the last 6 months, every single talk I've given has been about courage. Because for me, it's been a reflection around, I know the things I want to do. You know the things you want to do. You know the things that eke you and upset you. So why don't we just do something about it? And for me, it feels like a courage issue. So that's been my fascinating aha for myself in my space about what I need to now help people cultivate, which is courage to do what they need to do. So I've been developing a curriculum around that and already been speaking around that as well. So I guess for me, my next question then becomes, I mean, you've raised these particular issues. My question would be, and actually, Khotso, you can come up with a question too, because Khotso is much better at formulating questions than I am. He has more interesting questions than I do.
Not true.
It is true, Khotso. It is. I think it's a gift you have. But basically, I mean, I guess the next question that comes to mind for me, so what? Then what do we do? What comes to mind as a potential first step that allows us to to solve for these issues? I mean, Khotso, would you frame it differently?
Oh, I wouldn't, but I'll just maybe comment on what you just mentioned about courage. So, Rachel and I have had quite a few conversations about courage outside of the EI space, just personal conversations. And I think something that's also very powerful when you say, what do we do about some of these issues is I think psychologically getting to a space where you feel like the barriers to entry are low in doing what you want to do. And so, I mean, a small example was, I remember asking Rachel for advice to say, hey, I'm interested in the media space. What do I do? How do I meet people? And at some point, she was like, hey, why don't you just start your own network if you feel like there's a gap? And I did that, and then I was like, oh, it's hard, but it's not as hard as I thought. So getting to the space, and I always remember Rachel specifically saying, you are a creative agent. You're creative, and it's weird because that's like my daily mantra now.
Oh,
so whenever
wow, I
feel
didn't know
stuck,
that.
yeah, I always remind myself that I'm creative.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I guess it's about yeah. So I guess it would be interesting to hear from other people's point of view. I guess how they lower the psychological barriers to starting a specific thing, no matter how big or no matter how small.
Mm, great. Yeah, I told you, you frame questions so much better than I do.
Not
What's the
true.
psychological barrier? Much better than what's your next first step. Any thoughts?
Bandila, I see your hand is up.
Hi. Yeah, so I think my first thoughts is on what are the if you break down what are the things we're afraid of and what are the facets to fear. I think there's a fear that the idea won't be unique, that the idea won't make a huge impact. There's a fear that there's a fear of the pain that you'll have to endure to get it. There's a fear that you'll get something done, but it'll be mediocre. Um, there's a fear of, I think there's a huge fear of iteration, right? There's a fear that because when you play, maybe it's the philosophy background, but not even actually. I think if you are an creative agent or an ideas agent, there's a type of uh, thing you have for your own idea, a love or a guardedness you have about your own idea, and there's like a fear, or even if it's not fear, it's just like an aversion to saying, cool, this might not apply everywhere, but I ought to iterate as soon as I, test the market, what the market needs. And I think that's annoying. There's this odd mismatch, I think, especially in social issues, where you're like, as I said, I've been dealing with a fear of getting started on, something I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the how to deal with, gender-based violence, because I think there's a certain thing, and it's odd as an entrepreneurially minded person, what feeds into it is what might keep you going is usually for me, it's that the idea is innovative and cool. And that might be the primary driver versus actually that the idea solves a problem. Because we're used to, and I think where that comes from is that a lot of the general dominant narrative or the ideas or yeah the coverage we get on entrepreneurship is more on how cool or innovative the idea is versus what problem it solves, right? So it might be, you might just find that, okay, I want to do a cool, like Uber type thing that, I don't know, gets people together and links groups. I mean, the very early stages of my ideation would be like, you, if people are walking together in an area, it's like a alert system and it's a this and it's a that. and that's cool, and that's what pushed me. It's how cool the idea is versus how proximate you are to the issue. So now if I test it and it comes that Bandile dog, really, the cool elements of this idea are not feasible, and it's actually something boring or mundane that would solve the problem. And it's like, oh, do I really want to do it? You know? So there's I think as part of the conversation, and what you need to get over is saying the primary reasons as to why I'm doing this might be in roughly in order. It might be how cool the idea is, how much acclaim I can get from it, and then how much money I get, or I stand to make. And then maybe third or fourth is something like, how does this effectively solve the problem? And because that might be lower down on the list, you then lack the motivation to actually just follow through on something that's not really like blows your mind in terms of innovation, but does the primary important thing. If we're using a lean a lean startup framework that goes, the most important thing is, does it solve a customer's problem?
Are you admitting basically that from where you stand, and I'm using the word admitting to be provocative, that from where you stand, you would want, well, maybe it's not talking about you necessarily, but where society stands, people are often solving for what...
Say it as you want to say it. I'm fine to be provoked.
Right. So are you saying that I'm solving for fame and I'm solving for an accolade more than I am actually solving for a society, or creating a solution?
It's not that. It's a weird tension between what I ought to be doing. I'm very well aware that what I ought to be doing in terms of maybe ethically, in terms of a broad like responsibility, obligation side, but also from a viability perspective, is I should be solving this problem, whatever the solution looks like. But that broad vision is in tension. There's a tension between that and what will keep me going from day to day. And I think, sorry, just to add the last bit, I think that's particularly important given our conversation from last time about the problem of not being immersed in the problem. So if I sit as someone looking from the outside and I'm not, for example, a taxi commuter, there's that mismatch where I can quote unquote objectively see problems, that there's a social problem of transport in South Africa, but motivation-wise, because I'm not living the problem, it's something else that motivates me from day to day to solve it, right? And maybe say for something like gender-based violence, because I'm a man, or the transport problem or the education problem because I'm a middle-class person, because I'm not living the problem. It's what are the motivations then for me, like the day-to-day motivation. Because there's a difference between broad motivation, i.e. cognizing that something's a problem, versus day-to-day, like what keeps me going on doing the boring spreadsheet, the boring Excel work or budget work. I hate budgets. This sort of thing. I don't know if that's clear. I don't know if that's well put.
Yeah, I think it's clear. I mean, what do others have to say? Are there any hands up, Khotso?
Yes, Lillian, you can go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure if I got the points properly that was said earlier. The one thing that came up from a conversation, regarding courage, was, courage also needs to come with a safety net. A lot of people who have, good ideas. They just don't have the space to play around with their ideas because sometimes there's just too much to lose. I'm speaking now particularly about young people starting up businesses or young people pursuing business while at the same time studying and working. If you come from, a family where you are sort of expected to be a breadwinner, you sometimes don't have the safe space within which you can risk and start up your own business because, you have black tax and all these other things that require you to be putting in an effort. So you might have a grand idea that does meet the customer satisfaction or the need, but you simply cannot afford to take 6 months from work to work every day on your project in order to to run your idea from ideation to delivery, which is why I think stuff that Alan Gray is doing to allow fellows a chance to like earn a salary while doing a job with the association, so you can work on your probably good idea, but like a safe space to fail and risk is another thing that perhaps makes it seem as if people are not courageous enough to get out of those tiring corporate jobs in order to follow their dreams and do those life-changing ideas.
I'm so glad you brought up this point, Lillian, about the black tax, because this is a question I've often had for a lot of the young emerging leaders that I coach. And my question is always this: do we not have an option to opt out of black tax? I mean, are we doomed to be held down by black tax, or is there an out that we're just not taking because we don't have the courage to kind of tell some other people to go sort themselves out? What's your thought? Anybody, not just Lillian. Because if I were to say there's a top 5 of why a lot of young, black, very promising potential entrepreneurs don't become entrepreneurs, it's this. This is like probably, I would say, in the top 3. It always comes up. I have to take care of my mom. I have to take care of my parents. I have to take care of my siblings. I'm taking people to school. Always comes up. And my question is there an opt-out? Could you just say, actually, pause, I don't want to do this anymore?
Hey, so I was actually laughing. Sorry, when your question came up, I was laughing. It's a very interesting thing to think about.
I can hear a chuckle in the background.
Elijah, I think you're going to say something, Elijah. Elijah? Yes.
Yeah. So with the black tax scenario, yeah. All right.
Yes.
Yeah. So the black tax scenario, I think there's a possibility, but I think we have to think in the form of you have to sacrifice your lifestyle to pay the black tax for your current family, and then create generational wealth for the family coming after you. It's going to be a sacrificial thing that you're going to have to do personally if you're to go entrepreneurship and black tax. Alternatively, you can just disregard it, but I don't know, it comes back to a whole emotional thing and a sense of can't just leave your rest of your family stranded and all. I don't know, it's quite a tricky one. But then going back to what Lillian said about not being free in the environment because of black tax to actually go into entrepreneurship. I mean, if you're a true entrepreneur,
Elijah was struggling to hear you. Can everyone else hear Elijah?
No, he stopped talking or he cut off.
Elijah, feel free to
I
also
also can't hear him.
Elijah, feel free to just post that in the group chat and I'll read your comment out loud as well.
So if I understood Elijah well, the second point was there's an emotional tag, something that, I mean, an emotional tag, something that tags at your heart, not a tag. But so the first point I don't think I understood, that you'd have to let go of luxuries now to create luxuries for the future, but I didn't understand how that was related to the black tax.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Rachel. I guess my thoughts would be, I'm not sure what Elijah meant. Oh, I think he's back. Elijah, feel free to just interrupt us and say something. But I'll just quickly elaborate on this point. Feel free to interrupt. Was maybe some people are solving for having a certain lifestyle, being able to go out, eat at restaurants, and then still send money home to family. Whereas if people then sacrifice the lifestyle part, they can still send money home. And I don't know if maybe that's what he meant, that maybe you could still work on an idea part-time or bootstrap.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay.
Not too sure. I guess my question for you, I don't want to make assumptions, so I'm going to wait for Elijah's comment. I think he's struggling here. Is what about, we in our social circle, maybe it's just a perceived freedom. I do notice that a lot of people have a bit more financial leeway. So you know how we used to make this joke that when we were still in consulting, Rachel, and when some people would leave the firm to go on fun employment, FUN employment.
Yes.
So then maybe some people have a bit more leeway, I guess just because of the luck that they've had to get a certain type of education, and maybe come from a middle-class family. I don't know. Do you think more people of that profile are in the position to start a business, and are they actually starting businesses?
So you're saying people who don't have the black tax problem, essentially. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So for example, the one colleague of mine, I remember when we were still in consulting. For example, the kind of person who we both got into Joburg, and his parents bought him an apartment in Sandton. So somebody like that, has a certain amount of financial leeway. Are these types of individuals starting businesses? Are they in the position to, or do they have other perceived issues that we're not aware of?
So, I'm inclined to say yes and no. So I don't know if there's any research, and we should probably look, that shows us whether your probability of starting a business and then being successful at it is somehow correlated to your social standing or your class or background and responsibilities, social capital, etc. I think my yes is that I think those things do help. So if I want to start a business and my parents can buy me an apartment in Sandton, there's a high likelihood they can also introduce me to a venture capitalist, right? Probably, yes. Because they're probably in a wealthy network. Similar to how Alan Gray started his money, isn't his business. He got a lot of donations from a lot of family networks. I think he talks about that quite a bit. So yes, but I think I also have a no, which is that a lot of the stories of entrepreneurs that we have, whether they're global or local, a lot of them were not wealthy people. They didn't start off with a huge social standing, right? So if you go globally and you're talking about Steve Jobs as an example, he had to drop out of school because he didn't have money to continue, and was an adopted child, and the whole story started in a garage, blah 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 blah. And you've got multiple of those kinds of stories of people where Joy. Let's look at the stories we've looked at in our module, right? Joy, the lady who did the miracle mop, she started off with 2 children, struggling to put them through school, a single mother, divorced, etc. And here it didn't stop her from innovating. But I do remember very distinctly in the movie, there's a moment in which she actually decides she's going to be selfish and focus on what she wants versus on what other people need, because she was the kind of person who was, you know, the black tax type. So I do feel that it's probably a yes and a no. I mean, I think that the choice and the courage to put together the elements that allow you to be either self-supported or community supported in creating what you need to create is probably more important than the connections you have or the wealth that you have. That's my sense, is that, again, that conversation of courage. What do you have the courage to cut off? I mean, has anyone amongst us opted out of black tax? I'm interested to know.
Yes, Pandile, go ahead.
So on black tax, actually, Rethink Africa, we did some research last year with Alexander Forbes about what, well, for them, what we are asking, what people want to do with their savings. But the conversation helped us to crystallize, you know, the elements of black tax, and the sort of thing we settled on was it entails, you know, so conceptually, it's about the asset deficit that, on average, black young graduates would face. So when they arrive out of varsity, it's that they don't have, you know, they can't stay at home, or rather they don't have parents, you know, who will help them get started with an apartment or whatever, with a car, with a fridge, or whatever you need to be a young adult. So the asset deficits, it's cash responsibilities to immediate and extended family. So you're feeding more mouths because there's and not just feeding, not cash for consumption purposes, but also for investments in people. So you might be paying for someone else's education, etc. And then the third, and it's made worse because it's, of course, to the extended family, your grandmother's sister's children are your cousins and your siblings in an African context. So it's the money gets remitted to more people. But also then the last thing is the more interesting thing. It's a social signaling versus and conspicuous consumption part. And that's the third part where I think there is wiggle room, and you have room to opt out, right? So to answer your question, I think it happened to me just this weekend. So I was at home this weekend for a traditional ceremony, and it happened that, you know, amongst my friends, like, dog, we don't see you anymore in Joburg, make a case of beer and some whiskey for us. And in that moment, I was like, no, guys, it's like, I can't, it's not budgeted for me. And that's the room to play. So managing your lifestyle, managing your expectations, and I think opting out of those things, it's little battles, it's little sort of social knocks that you take for making that decision. But as with most things and with people management in general, best to do it early and to do it firmly, so that, you know, and with some sort of being able to negotiate well, which is the difficult part of saying this is not necessary, this is not, you know, it doesn't fit into sort of what I need to be doing with my resources. So I think for me, if we're to start some sort of broad movement, although I don't know how cultural change happens. We'd need I'd really like a social anthropologist or someone like that to say how contemporary, to give us the details on how contemporary culture changes. But I think it's that sort of small things where you say, hey guys, let's not go out, or let's encourage each other to do savings. Let's encourage each other as young people, as peers, to cut down on this, at least on the conspicuous consumption part. You know, for me, a great another thing that I would want to hear more about in Savings Month this month, I hope I do come across it, is, you know, these sorts of stokvels for young people, right? So I don't know if you know what, like, so savings clubs, the way our mothers and grandmothers had them.
Yeah, the stock.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's sort of like a cool thing. Some of my cool, more financially prudent friends have done those sorts of things, for property even, but for other things. And that could be a cultural meme that I think could spread, to be financially savvy as young people, to encourage a savings culture, and perhaps there's a good business opportunity from that. That's part of the thing that the research we did with Alexander Forbes, to look at, you know, what works. Why do people prefer to do stokvels and to do informal savings rather than save with, you know, your Absa Bank? Is it's nice because, like, your sort of informal savings clubs, there's a better mechanism for discipline, because it's, you know, sort of other people. There's a greater uh, uh, social aspect, feeds into a different part of your money or different part of your psychology, because you get, you know, a sense with interaction with other human beings, that perhaps you guys are saving together for a purpose. You sort of feel more connected than, you know, the more impersonal, I've just set up a savings account, and, you know, because no one's keeping me responsible, I'll dip into the savings. You know, these sorts of things. I think that's a great line on the black tax sort of perspective, to be like, how do we cut down on the unnecessary / conspicuous consumption, and how do we then, on the flip side, improve as a peer group amongst friends to boost our savings and to boost sort of our inclination to have good financial habits.
Okay. Okay, that's. I mean, let me just put it out there, as the social anthropologist on the group. That I think that in Africa, what I always find fascinating is that we think of culture as a big baobab tree, right? As this old tree that has been growing forever and ever, and its roots are like sunken, and you actually could never pull it out because it's just too strong. And I often say, really, culture is like a very strong and robust river, but it moves and it's fluid. And if you think of how you change an ecosystem around a river, you have to put certain things in place to force the change. You know, so if you want to change the way a river meanders, you probably have to do with something around the soil on the banks of the river. But if we think of culture as a river versus a big baobab tree, I think what we would find very quickly is that there's room to negotiate. And I find sometimes African culture can be, right? People think if they were to send a question up to God that is contrary to what's in, let's say, the Bible or the Quran, they're going to get struck by lightning. But often when they do, they find out that doesn't happen actually. But I think it's the same thing with culture, is people think if they were to transgress, what we call in anthropology transgressing the culture, then somewhere, somehow it would all fall apart. And I'm always sort of challenging people to say, have you ever tried? So, you know, I actually opted out of black tax, and I said, I'm just not doing it. I'm not helping anybody because I have to help myself. And I want to be able to do things that make sense to me in this moment. And what I found is actually in many ways, there was more creating of dependence that was unnecessary. So, you know, you're taking care of siblings who should actually be taking care of themselves. Let's say I was never in that scenario. I'd never had a sibling scenario. My siblings take care of themselves. But hypothetically speaking, you have a bunch of siblings that you're taking care of, when really they should be on 2 feet, right? So the more you support them, the more dependence you're creating, and the more lazy you make them actually. And for me, I found that it actually created more social capital because you allowed people to find themselves. I guess it's very similar to the argument that Dambisa Moyo makes around should we be giving aid to Africa. I think it's the same thing. Should you be giving aid to your relatives? Does that really help them in the long run? I don't know. I think it's subjective, and people need to reflect on what it means for them. But I always wondered about that opt-out, whether people use it enough.
I like that parallel that you drew, Rachel, with Dambisa Moyo. That's a good one. Before I share my view, I wanted to give Lillian a chance. Lillian?
Oh, thank you. I wanted to make 2 comments. So, Bandile, thank you so much for sharing that really cool information about the research that you guys did. I think it's very interesting. I am quite excited about the savings aspect because from my experience with Black Tax, family is understanding when you have mandatory things you have to pay for, right? So I'm very transparent with my family, like particularly with my parents about my finances, right? So say you earn 20,000 Rand and they realize that 15,000 Rand is already going somewhere where it has to go. And by somewhere, I mean paying, house bond, bond for your house, car insurance, whatever. Somehow, the requirements for the things that we categorize as Black Tax will fit into your 5,000 Rand, leaving you with nothing to save or to do extra things that you like to do. So if saving is put in as a mandatory thing to do, like as with the stokvel, like my parents, if I say, oh no, I'm taking this money to the stokvel, they understand that. But if I say, I'm going to take this 500 Rand and invest it with Allan Gray every month, they're like, why? So some of it has to do with financial literacy and the experience with working with investment tools. And remember, we have been exposed to some really good education, and we've been exposed to different ways of creating and maintaining wealth that they may not have been exposed to. So when we come with our ideas of creating financial sustainability for not just now, but for the longer term, sometimes we lose them in the way we communicate. So if you, again, it depends on how transparent you are about your finances and what role your parents have in your finances, right? So, saying I'm putting this 2,000 Rand for this stokvel club we have, that if that is the language that they understand, then maybe use that kind of tool instead of saying I'm putting 500 for Allan Gray, another 500 for Coronation, another one for Forex, whatever. And then this feeds also into one solution for Black Tax that a friend of mine was sharing, that, if you're going to be helping out your family, if you decide you're going to help them, you need to be clear about how much you are helping with per month. So if you say, I'm contributing 3,000 Rand per month, if the needs go beyond 3,000 Rand, then they will know that all they're getting from you is 3,000 Rand, and the rest they have to go and hustle in the other ways. But if you just have an open-ended, I'll help where I can, then the demands can sort of rise. But when they know what their budget is from your salary, it tends to create clearer communication channels and expectations for what you can help with. I found, because my mom, because my parents know my finances, if someone comes wanting some help for me, they'll be saying, no, my child doesn't have money, because they feel that they actually understand, what the way my finances are standing. So, that's from my personal experience. And then the other thing I wanted to share is, I found that, sometimes this idea of creating social capital, we actually can be helpful in our non-monetary resources to help improve or increase social capital. So, my mom had been a teacher for like 18 years, and then decided she was going to study mining engineering, to go and try and better her chances for making better or more savings for her pension. And I found that, you know, the help I've been given to my mom, whether it's with homework or helping her get faster at using the computer, things like that, have enabled her to finish her studies and her internships within a smaller amount of time than it would have if, you know, if maybe she was just doing it on her own. And that has helped her to now, you know, get a better job. And so when she gets a better job with better income, then that requires less from my income, and therefore my black tax responsibility reduces. So yeah, so, you know, we could think about, you know, not helping family just through monetary ways, but also you know, other things as well. And then, sorry, this is the third one. I promise it's the last one. So I had an interesting talk with Fred Swanica actually about this of the African Leadership Academy and college and stuff. And you know, I was asking him, you know, do you actually think that the ALA graduates are actually going to transform Africa? And he said, look, maybe their kids will. And I said, why? He said, because, you know, for a lot of them coming from, you know, diverse socioeconomic groups, they will be, you know, the first people to go abroad in their families, the first people to have good education that gives them that much better salary, and then they get trapped by black tax so heavily that perhaps they might not, you know, build the Facebooks of Africa and the Shell and the BPs or whatever. But their children are going to grow up in better circumstances than them and will probably have less black tax to pay and things like that. And hopefully the passion of their parents to transform the continent will also seep into those of their children, and then they will probably be the ones that transform Africa. I thought that was just interesting, you know, for organizations like, you know, Alan Gray to say, the foundation, you know, to say, how are we measuring our impact? Should we also measure what our fellows go on to do with not just their careers, but also those of their kids, and do comparative studies, you know, kids of a fellow versus kids of an unfellow who had the same degree but just a different entrepreneurial training. What did that lead to? I think those would be very interesting.
Fascinating. Fascinating and worrying at the same time, because that's exactly what's said of every generation, right? You're going to do better than your parents. And in Africa, that hasn't proven the case. Not yet. So that's interesting. I remember speaking at a conference, and I was talking about young people in this generation and, you know, the promise of this generation. And one guy who's in his 60s stopped me in his tracks and he said, we were the generation. We also were told the same stuff. We are the generation, we're better than our parents, we were the first to go to school, we were the first to access the ideas around industrialization, but we were never able to do it. And now you guys are talking about technology, but it's the same thing. We don't see any action. It's interesting and scary that you say Swanica said that. It's fascinating. Okay.
Rachel, could you expand on that point with the 60-year-old gentleman? What was his context? Which part of the continent did he come from? Or could you give other examples as well?
He was from Nigeria, and he was specifically talking about the fact that, you know, their parents, for example, most of the parents of the generation before hadn't even been to school. And they were the first generation to go to school, right? These are guys in their 60s. So their parents would probably be in their 90s now, right? So they had actually had access to education. He had actually gone and studied abroad, and he was part of, I don't know if you remember the name of them, but there's like a group of young people who are famous for meeting in London. It was like an activism thing, but they were Africans, and that's where Kwame Nkrumah came out of. I can't remember what it's called, the Liverpool or something. And he came out of that. These were the people who had the promise for Africa. They were the ALA students of their time, if we were to put it that way. He's stopping me in my tracks, was basically saying there's nothing unique about this narrative about the next generation is going to be the one, especially not in Africa, because we were the next generation. And in fact, we've had children who are supposed to be the next generation, because he has kids who are in their 30s. And they're now having children who are supposed to be the generation. When is the generation really coming? Like, we've missed all the revolutions saying, you know, these are the ones who will catch the industrial, these are the ones who will do the technology, these are the ones who are the fourth industrial. And it's not happening, at least not in Africa. It's happening in other places. We've seen China over 30 years be able to move literally in one generation. So if we're still saying actually it's ALA's children, that's a scary thought. Because what's wrong with us? Why not now? Why in another 30 years? It's a scary thought for me.
It is. I mean, maybe he doesn't believe this with every cell in his body, but yeah. It was speaking, you know,
Say that
to Black Tag. I'm saying maybe he doesn't believe this with every cell in his body,
Right, okay.
but it is what he raised in relation to, you know, Black Tax and repaying the ALA loan, which is what a lot of the graduates have to do if they're not working on the continent by a certain age.
Right, exactly, by 25. Absolutely. But I mean, it's not just Fred. I think there are a lot of people who think exactly what Fred is saying. But I guess my question is, at what point does this Black Tax end? And at what point does the generation really arrive? So, Khotso, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It's just helping me sort of, I guess, reflect on what these potential barriers could be for raising this new generation of entrepreneurs. Because I think we have had the progress in different spaces, so certainly in the civil space, politics as well, and then I think just, you know, creating new livelihoods with jobs and education. But yeah, it's an interesting point. It's an interesting point.
Yeah. Well, so two other things that came up for me in the videos that I'd also like to put out there, and let's see again, because I want us to stick to the conversation of how can we, you know, create solutions for society. And I hope that this gives you food for thought around the Black Tax thing. I really think we all have some thinking to do around this particular issue. Because if that's what's holding us back from being entrepreneurial, I think we must really interrogate what it means. And I think there are various solutions. I loved the stuff, like you said, that Bandile said, and the stuff that Lillian also just said, which is, I think there are multiple solutions available to us about how to manage it, but let's manage it because it needs to be managed. But two things came up for me in the videos that I thought was interesting. The one was around who we partner with in creating solutions. So Fred Swanek actually in his video raises an interesting point. I was sharing this with Khotso earlier, that, you know, the difference between partnering with the US and China is very interesting, because the US for the last 100 years has been industrialized. So they've never experienced America look like how Africa looks right now. So when they come to Africa, there's a tendency to think, oh, we're helping the poor Africans, because they've never actually seen the kinds of things that you see here in America. Okay, whereas with China, because over the last 30 years, they've been able to industrialize them really, really quickly. They actually, when they come to Africa, they see an investment opportunity, because they've actually seen what it's like to move yourself in a short space of time. So there was an interesting conversation. I mean, it wasn't a big conversation. He was mentioning it in passing, but it really triggered for me, and I heard about the importance of who you partner with in terms of creating solutions, and whether they actually end up being a hindrance or a help to you. That's number one, and I'd love us to reflect on that. But number two, there was also a point raised by one of the speakers at Quartz about learning from nature. And one of the things he was saying is that what you learn from nature is that if you allow real competition and real survival of the fittest, quote unquote, you actually get better outcomes versus creating, for example, nepotistic systems that hinder people from actually being able to do what they need to do. So, for example, in Africa, you know, you have, you know, funding, BE tenders, and corruption around that, and it's going to certain groups of people versus the people who really could innovate. And so we're not learning from nature that we actually have to let the fittest survive. We have to give the resources to the people who look like they're smart enough to actually create solutions. And I thought that was also fascinating that, you know, many a time, because we are giving all the resources to Alan Gray fellows, let's just say, we might be missing, I don't know, the William Kamkwamba, who actually has the capacity to a solution in Africa, but maybe just doesn't have the right network. So how do you, in a society that's created artificial means of making people survive, how do you find these fittest? How do you locate them? And I thought that was also fascinating. And so I'm just putting it out there as a cat amongst the pigeons, and hear what it arouses for you guys in terms of being able to leverage solution makers.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, Rachel. Sure. I also think, because I see the same, you know, not just with resources being channeled to very specific people, but also information. And I always wonder what would happen if information was freely available for everyone to access, and if that could also lead to accumulating more resources. And I think we'd see much more diversity in the type of solutions that come out, and I think a much more competitive market in general. I just want to give Bandile a chance. Bandile?
Yes, so I totally agree with that. It is sort of a weird thing that, you know, you sometimes wonder. I often wonder, had someone, again, immersed in their own context, had maybe the training or the access to resources that I had, would they not be, again, a more competitive market? And so for me, though, the thing is, I go, perhaps how you pay it back is then sharing the information, sharing the resources, being able to pay back this wealth of knowledge that you have. And I quite like, frameworks like the Lean Startup Framework. It's precisely built to be like, sort of, if you can see a problem, how do you get started without resources on solving the problem? And maybe then the role again is not to be to not be the front man / front person in the whole thing, in solving problems of society, and you disrupt, again, the popular perception of entrepreneurship as the single, innovative, brilliant, energetic Lone Ranger. Perhaps your role, as in other contexts, you to just be an enabler of someone. And I think in a community like ours, that ought to be okay. I trust that because we are selected, quote unquote selected, to have both an entrepreneurial mindset, but a mindset for giving back or for effecting social change. That should be a thing amongst us that goes, okay, we can disrupt, and we ought to disrupt the popular idea that I need to come up with something brilliant. I mean, and that's my reflection on what you have thrown out, Rachel, but there's the other aspect for me, which goes in the whole finding solutions for society. Back to, again, this whole thing of, can business solve the issues of society? And that speaks to Naomi Klein's point, to be like, and the points of other people. I also think of Mahmoud Mamdani, who talks about the influence of capitalism and the commodification of every aspect of human life. And yeah, my sort of social leanings or my humanities leanings also stop me psychologically from going like, yo, is business the best way? And the way I sort it out in my mind is that you go, well, introducing quote unquote business solutions to social problems doesn't necessarily mean commodifying things, or you can have a nuanced approach. You can say you take the sort of some of the methodology, some of the issues around like efficiency, rationalizing use of resources, these sort of aspects of business, but then you pull back on the profit focus, right? So why has capitalism worked all over the world, or rather not worked? Crucially, why has it become so pervasive in society is not because I think of purely that humans are profit driven. Humans are not purely profit driven. The thing about capitalism is its focus on efficiency, rationalizing resources, planning, innovation, and those are the positive parts of capitalism. And then you decide, I will use that aspect, the focus on innovation, the rationalizing of the efficient use of resources, this sort of thing, rather than focusing on the profit side. And maybe the businesses we build as fellows must be able to do that, to say, look, the not driving for profit, and explicitly we're not driving to profit, we're driving towards sustainability. And if lots of money, like Zuckerberg money, doesn't come, that must be okay. And we're just using the business aspect for its virtues, like innovation, or that sort of thing.
That's good. And in fact, that's so provocative and smack bang with what Swaji was saying, because that's the model she's using. It's not about profitability, it's about sustainability and creating livelihoods for people. So very, very insightful and interesting. Any other thoughts?
Sure. Elijah, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Looking at partnerships, as you said earlier, I think partnerships is a very key thing in building solutions, because you have to make sure visions align. Last year, I started a company with my cousin and a family friend, and we were all about building an African clothing brand. But along the line, visions started changing, and they were just like trying to get the clothes out, but then they started not thinking about the whole African part. We're getting to a point where they want to manufacture the clothes in China as opposed to manufacturing it here in Africa. And that was a clash, because I mean, how can you produce something African and it not being made in Africa? So I think when you're looking at partnerships, you really need to understand vision and understand what your partner is willing to compromise to reach that vision, because that can clash as time goes on and can deteriorate the company as a whole, or the relationship between the two of you. So that's one big thing fundamentally with partnerships. And then coming to nature and looking at nature.
Before you move on to there, any thoughts from what you learned from that partnership, from the vision piece? How do you create a vision that everybody understands and sticks to? Did you learn anything around that? Because you clearly understood that there was a vision issue, but how do you create that you can hold on to and actually stick to?
I think you need to have a thorough discussion in the beginning about what you guys are building and why you're building it, and really like question, almost have an interrogation amongst the different partners, so that everyone can understand each person's thinking process to reaching this specific goal. So as time goes on, everyone can know why this person says this about this business, or this says this. Because towards the end of the year, when we started breaking apart, when I said I wanted to leave the company, the one guy was under the impression that we're building an app for clothing to be posted on, and the other guys were thinking of us making a clothing brand. So there was a vision clash there, because we hadn't sat down and actually discussed how are we going to reach this vision and why are we actually going about forward.
That's interesting. Like, my question is why? Why did that conversation not happen? If you were to reflect back, it seems like an obvious conversation to have, and yet we know from the research that many people don't have that conversation. So I'm wondering, in your case, why?
I think it was the excitement of getting something started, up and running. So we overlook the admin part, because I mean, a lot of people are not very admin orientated. No one likes filing, no one likes writing, no one likes taking minutes. You just want to start. So I think we skipped that too quickly and actually just went in and looked for guys to produce the caps, looked for a logo maker, but actually sitting and discussing the actual brand. So it's just the excitement of starting something without looking at the back end.
Okay. And I think that's a global problem because most entrepreneurs don't tend to be administrators. So the partnership with is truly important because dreamers don't tend to like to implement, isn't it? So
That's true. Yeah.
right. Okay. And then you were going to say a second point.
Oh yeah. So the second point is going back to looking at nature for actually solutions. How you were talking about looking at the characteristic of how animals interact with each other. I think a more powerful thing to look at in nature is biomimicry, looking at how specific animals create stuff and trying to implement that in a more technological sphere as well. I know there's a building somewhere in Africa, I'm not too sure, where they don't use any air conditioning, but they've built it the way termites built their hut. And because of that, it allowed a lot of ventilation to go through, and therefore they don't need a ventilation system to actually, they don't need an air conditioning system throughout the whole building because of copying how termites build their little living places. So I think that's also a powerful thing to look in when we're trying to solve solutions within society, to actually look at how nature solves similar problems and then try and copy those.
Absolutely. Biomimicry is a very powerful field, and I would suggest if anyone hasn't looked into it on the group, that they actually do, because it's fascinating, the things
That's
you can
true.
learn. Yeah, spot on, spot on.
I think Lillian also wanted to say something.
Mm-hmm.
You can go ahead, Lillian.
No. Sorry, is my hand up? Oh, sorry, I never brought it down. I apologize. I have nothing more to say. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you, Lillian. Consort, did you have any thoughts?
Maybe just one point when Elijah you said, "Oh, how can we be making something African when it's manufactured somewhere else?" Yeah, that's also just a complex thing on its own. But just something interesting to reflect on was I was listening to a podcast where a famous economics paper written about the life of a pencil, like a writing pencil, from the perspective of the pencil itself. And the pencil then tells us its life story, and you realize a lot of its different parts are made everywhere, and that no single person actually knows how to make a pencil. There's this whole value chain. So I think in us thinking about African products as well, I guess what does make an American pencil when a lot of those parts of the pencil don't even come from America? And I think it would be interesting for us to also think about what it means to manufacture an African product where it's quite possible a lot of the parts of that product won't actually come from Africa. But I understand your argument. I understand your argument completely. I think it makes sense. This was just a random side thought.
Well, not random, very valid, because it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because you're right. Who has actually built anything exclusively in their own space? I think many things have happened via these partnerships that we're talking about. I think in Africa, the conversation is how do we negotiate the conditions of the partnership that we should be thinking about in our solution making, would you not say?
That actually makes sense, yeah. More meaningful negotiation, because I think there has been maybe a history of sort of extracting too much value away from the continent in these partnerships. So that makes perfect sense. A more equitable value sharing partnership.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think of the example that Nkosana gave in our third module, when he talked about the Boeing, he talked about that on this panel, isn't it? How Boeing parts are made in different parts of Europe. And in fact, it's been one of the biggest characteristics of the European Union is this Boeing thing. So a huge amount of revenue has come out of them sharing the part making. And they've increased the use of Boeing amongst themselves. And so as a region have become stronger for it. And here on the continent, there are many things we could be doing that with diamonds, for example, oil in certain spaces, thinking about, for example, how do we get one country to be the big negotiator for prices and everybody sort of siphons their stuff to that country so that we don't have players, dividing us and conquering us all the time, but we're speaking with one voice. But also, you know, we are the biggest users of matatus in the world, or combis, or taxis, whatever you want to call them in different parts of Africa. Is there a possibility that one of our solutions is actually producing those matatus or combis or taxis as an African continent, and countries are in various parts? Instead, we get our combis largely from Japan, I believe it is. So,
sorry, I got interrupted when some fellows walked in. Sorry about that. My apologies.
okay. So, yeah, I was done. I was just giving that example.
Cool.
Any other thoughts? I mean, do we feel, yeah, there's a hand up. I see a hand up.
Go ahead, Bandile.
Yes, so on the issue of solving or solutions for society, I don't know if anyone had given thought to what I'd asked last week about how I actually have asked this question before, but I'd like to ask it again. Getting a handle of the problems, the details of the problems faced in the society, right? So getting so as we had said, the whole spending a week in Nigeria to understand, you know, the market has, just to throw the question out again, in terms of successful strategies for doing that, does anyone, you know, gotten any new information on that? Or yeah, basically that's the question. Of because I think it does speak to what Khoso is saying now about the nuances of, you know, an issue like uh, uh, what makes something African, right? So we might, you know, your choice to manufacture something outside the continent may just be a function of you not knowing the capability of manufacturing on the continent. It could happen that you don't know what's happening in a different part of the continent. So yeah, it's again this question of, I think a big problem is often not knowing what is happening around you, what the getting a fine-grained detail of what the problems are, and a fine-grained detail on where possible, easy, low-hanging solutions could lie.
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very valid point too. But your question is strategies, and I guess my question is, what do you mean a strategy? I mean, I guess in my mind, my thought would be just go. Just find a mechanism to go and connect with a bunch of people online, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, do some research. I remember my niece. She's a fashion designer, and she had this idea to travel across Africa to meet other designers and see what they were doing in their parts of the continent. And she just started connecting with people online. She didn't go in the end because she didn't find funding to do it, as she said. So that's what she said held her back. But I think she could have still done it, but she didn't. She was actually able to connect with people so easily online, just by Googling a few things, and voila, she had already made arrangements to say, I'll meet you in Nairobi and Lagos and all sorts. Is that what you mean by a strategy?
Yes. So what popped into my head is, if I had the time or the inclination, or should make the time and inclination, like hanging out on the Hello Peter, a place where like people, it's designed for people to go and complain, and you go, okay, cool. But so how would you do it, especially though from? But I assume Hello Peter's for, you know, middle class people that take themselves maybe a bit too seriously. But something like that to say, is it market spaces? Is it you hang out at the taxi rank? but also strategy is the right sorts of questions. So often people, because part of the problem in general is that people see their problems as problems, and they may be quite fixed, and they don't know how to tease away the information that makes it into a solution, and at that a business solution. So what by strategy maybe I mean, what's your key set of questions that would get you your information as quickly as possible in a way that's not like you're fishing for information. So I don't expect to go to like a marketplace or a taxi rank and be like, "Hi, I'm trying to solve problems." I guess there is the organic factor to it of asking questions, but I'm wondering maybe from a bright bunch like us, are there those things where you go, this is how you spark conversations that get to like the roots of how people, what problems people are facing, and then what you could solve. Yeah, that's about it.
Mm. Good one, good one. Any
Yeah,
idea?
the only thing that came to mind is, so sorry, I'm gonna give a very myopic view again on, especially with regard to like technology businesses, but I'm sure entrepreneurs from other spaces have done something similar. Um, so an example is, what do they call it? Oh, the concierge strategy, where you try and solve something for somebody in a very manual way before you actually start the business, even if it's just using a spreadsheet, um, or if you're going to start like an online shopping thing where people can order online, you actually go to the store and you shop with the people. So there's numerous examples. Um, yeah, so I think it's probably applicable maybe to other industries where people have done something similar or simulated the same type of experience. And Y Combinator does quite a lot of this with their startup school, but I am aware that it's got a very strong tech and American bias.
Mhm.
Yeah, but in South Africa as well, I'm just trying to remember the resource, because I think before Aisha started Sweep South, she might have, there's these non-scalable things that you've got to do in the beginning to really understand your customer's problem. Um, Sometimes it means you going out there to go, and so the business is basically sending housekeepers to go and clean where consumers order. Um, so it might be that you go and get to experience what it's like to be a housekeeper, etc. So there's different things.
Fascinating. Is Aisha the one who started Sweep South?
Yes,
Our
Aisha.
Aisha from the fellowship.
No, 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 no. She's
Oh,
no, she's not part of the fellowship. Aisha Pando. Yeah, she's a prominent Cape Town tech entrepreneur.
okay. I thought you were talking about our Aisha.
Oh no, not that Aisha. So I'll just need to find the resource. I don't remember how she shared her story exactly, but there was some really great insight there.
Okay. Well, we're nearing the close of this webinar. What I'm interested to find out is the problems, if we look back to the problems that we raised initially, do people find themselves a little bit more, I suppose, curious about what they could do differently in terms of approaching this issue? So we had an issue around pads, road rage, marriage and divorce, dating, patriarchy, mass-based solutions to the internet. I think that's what we raised. My issue was courage. I mean, do we find ourselves curious in a different way about how you could approach these kinds of issues? And again, also, if you've got a better frame for that question, please feel free.
I see Bandile's hand is up. Bandile can go ahead.
Yeah, very briefly. I think, yeah, thinking about it differently, just hearing the courage thing, I think for me is helping me to think about it differently. I think speaking it out to other people helped me organize my thoughts to be like, okay, why am I afraid to start, you know, on an initiative, and how do I get that alignment properly done? So specifically on you know the list of issues to tackle, I think a lot of them require because they're such. Oh, and your comment on culture as the social anthropologist helps me to think about how a lot of it will just be that the issue, like say road rage, seems very daunting because it's the behavior of you know thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and that's like weird because often with especially the road rage thing, I have no clue as to why it's so bad in South Africa. You don't even know where to start about thinking about the problem, and I think if you wonder, is it, and it's not even clear. It's like, is it higher stress levels in the country, or is it like it's one of those things where I think about it every so often, and I just don't make no headway as to why our road rage problem is so bad. Is it because we're a violent society? But that's sort of like a really vague thing because violence is linked to apartheid, but that's never an adequate thing for me. But anyway, I think if you think about it as small little things that you can eat at or change in a very little way, I think that's very helpful to finding solutions for society. Society need not be this big daunting thing, or social problems need not be these big daunting things that you don't know where you're going to start, and you can just start at a very small scale.
In fact, Wandile, it's funny, I like what you said when you were posing your last question around when you talk about the strategy, you're actually asking how can we ask the right questions. And I think I would say, you know, to these questions around road rage and batterings and women being killed, men being killed, because men are being killed too by women, right? All of these things, I think I love the question of curiosity, which is why I think I'm ending with it, is how can we ask different questions and have the courage to ask different sets of questions? So today I was on Twitter, I think it was on Twitter, on Facebook, there's something that went viral where this woman wrote to her CEO, to the company, basically, a company email, and she said, I'm going to take 2 days to take care of my mental health. And the CEO wrote back and said, thank you so much for saying that out loud, because it really helps us make taboo topics untaboo. And I think for Africa, solving our solutions, I think a lot of it will be embedded in what kinds of questions can we ask each other, and how curious can we be, and how honest can we be with each other as well. So I just love what you've just said. That's just as a validation. Yeah.
Just a quick thought on my side, and also just while I say this point, just feel free to raise up your hand so that I turn to you next. Oh, just by the way, Rachel's on Twitter. Woo! Knowing you must have looked. I didn't know. Woo! You must be looking for it. Woo! Okay. Awesome.
So you make me seem like such a fossil, although I am a fossil, but go ahead.
No, it's not that. It's because knowing how you are, and I guess the things that you care about and what you think about and what you're interested in, and there are a lot of people who care about the same things on Twitter. But it's interesting how these different behaviors play out.
Yes.
In other words, maybe that's a diplomatic way of saying, I wonder who you get along with and who you fight with on Twitter.
Oh, I don't. I'm so silent. You're so right. Like, I shouldn't even be on Twitter. I don't even know why I'm on Twitter.
Bandile is like, what's your handle? He's asking for your Twitter handle. Yeah,
so it's at Rachel N. Adams. So just my name with the whatever, what you call it, the middle name, the middle initial. So at Rachel, I do post once in a while, not all of the time. I have a radio show now every Monday, so that I tend to post on that more than anything else. But yeah, it's not going to be exciting, Bandile. Not exciting. So please carry on. Say what you were going to say.
Oh no, I'm good. Elijah and Lillian.
Okay. Oh, is that what you wanted to say?
Oh no, sorry, I just got carried away with the Twitter thing. But I guess maybe really quickly, the one thing that I was reflecting on with this session was what the role is of our particular generation. So I always imagined that the previous generation, especially in the South African context, the big problem that they solved was dealing with apartheid and racism. And then our role would be to, I don't know, maybe this was very narrow-minded of me, but to create more equitable opportunities while facing a lot of global pressures. So yeah, it's interesting to think about what our role really would be in relation to the fact that some things take multiple generations to really start showing a big impact.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Khotso.
Elijah and Lillian?
Elijah and Lillian, closing thoughts?
You can go ahead, Lillian. Hey, Lillian. Or Elijah, do you want to go ahead so long while we wait for Lillian?
Cool. I think for me, it's just to have a courage in our ideas and ourselves. I mean, as entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, actually start what a solution we're trying to go as opposed to, and take it away from ideation and actually put in the steps. Start asking the questions, start implementing the research and all of that. And I think the biggest question also what Khotso said about what makes anything African is something that's gonna haunt me for a week now to try to think about that and try to understand it. It's just quite a deep question.
Yeah, Elijah, if you want, I could send you the podcast where they talked about the life of this pencil and how it's an American pencil, but it's kind of a global pencil. I'll put it in the chat just in case.
I appreciate it. Thanks, man. Yeah, so that's for me. And then also just... Yep.
Right.
Cool. And Lillian? Can go ahead, Lillian. Or Lillian, maybe you can share in the chat. You can share your comment if you're struggling with audio. And maybe while we wait, Rachel, please let me know when I can just share 3 quick announcements.
You can share because we've got 3 minutes left, so it'll be good if you can share. But before you share, I think let me just say thank you guys as always. I mean, you guys are the troopers of this group. You're always here, always ready to have the conversation. So thank you for coming. Enlightening. I think we've all grown we have different mindset transformations. So thank you. And one more, which is 2 weeks from now, and we'll have Chinezi Chijioke, who's the founder of Pioneer Academies, coming to talk to us about the work that he is doing. So please come, one and all. So you could go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Lillian says I've muted her, but I'm clicking here and it says self-muted. Yeah, Lillian, maybe you could just share your closing thoughts on the group chat. I did see your note, and I actually unmuted you, so you're self-muted. It might just be a technical glitch. And Lillian, while you type, I'll just quickly share 2 quick announcements. Also, just maybe 3. The first one in relation to Chinezi, as Rachel said, was, so this will be the last EI class. And the topic will be how to make the future happen and also how to scale a business. And what makes Chinezi interesting is, so they've started with a handful of schools in South Africa and Kenya, and soon they'll be scaling up to many, many more schools in different parts of the continent. But he's already started scaling the team anyway. So it's good to just find out, when you do start to make your dreams happen, what does it mean practically and operationally to scale your team and your company. Then the second thing, so please invite friends, etc., and please come and join that conversation. Then the second thing was to celebrate the closing of EI. We're going to have an Africa Business Quiz Night, still in webinar format. What that basically is you volunteer, you sign up, and we basically ask you a bunch of questions, almost like, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Just that you won't win R1 million, you win 5,000 Rand. And so just to reflect on all the different things we've learned, and just to celebrate where EI is and all the contributions that you've shared as a group. And then the last thing is, we are very interested in figuring out how to improve EI. So one thing that we've done is we've tried to make the content more relevant in 2017 by having a strong Africa focus, having a much more diverse group of entrepreneurs that we get insights from in the content. So we've done a little bit better. We've had many more entrepreneurs of color. We're still a little behind in terms of featuring female entrepreneurs, but please let us know how we could improve the course in terms of content and relevancy. And one way you could do that is by filling in the EI survey that I sent both in the newsletter and in the reminder email this week. So next week, again, I'll send it out with the reminder about Chinezi. And then what would also be helpful is, at some point, if you could please let us know who's open to a phone call, because I think chatting on paper, getting feedback on paper versus a phone call is very different. So if you are open to a 10-minute phone call as well, please indicate that in the survey. That's it on our side. Thank you very much, Rachel. Oh, sorry. Sorry, there's Lillian's comment.
Oh, where is it? I don't see it.
If you don't mind, I can quickly read it out.
Yeah.
So Lillian says, quote, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Thanks for sharing the great insights. Thanks, everyone. And well done for such a good list of African entrepreneurs for EI.
Oh, thank you so much, Lillian. Lillian just said at the beginning this would be her last webinar because she's going off on a whole journey. So Lillian, thank you so much for being a trooper and being with us all this time. It's been incredible. And wish you all the best with your journeys, because there's going to be lots of them. Okay, well, thank you guys. We'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. And until then, I wish you warmth